A busy news day. So glad you were with us on Outnumbered Overtime. I'm Harris. Here's Dana.
This is a Fox News Alert, a live look at Singapore, where it's 2 in the morning and just 7 hours from the historic summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, and this is the Daily Briefing. The two leaders will kick it off with a one-on-one meeting. At stake, dismantling the regime's nuclear arsenal and perhaps ending decades of hostility between the U.S. and North Korea. Reaction now from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
The fact that our two leaders are sitting down face to face is a sign of the enormous potential to accomplish something that will immensely benefit both of our peoples and the entire world.
Bret Baier, the anchor of Special Report, is in Singapore standing by. But first, let's go to Chief White House Correspondent John Roberts, who is also there covering it all. John, I follow you on Twitter, so I feel like I've been keeping up with your travels, but I'm so glad to get to hear from you directly from the summit.
How did you like the little water bottle with the picture of the president and Kim Jong-un? Well, that's an interesting souvenir. We'll see if we can get that past airport security. You know, President Trump spent yesterday, because it's already Tuesday, here in Singapore, preparing for this big meeting that happens, as you said, in 7 hours. The president meeting with the Singaporean Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong for lunch, for a one-on-one, as well as an expanded bilateral meeting. Also making telephone calls to Moon Jae-in, the president of South Korea, and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, just to make sure everybody's on the same page here before he goes into the summit. And then the president spending the afternoon yesterday meeting with his national security team that's involved in the North Korean negotiations. The president playing down expectations for what might be possible in this meeting, but also hoping for a surprise. He has got a lot to offer Kim Jong-un: economic guarantees, security guarantees, possibly finally an end to the Korean War and the normalization of relations between North Korea and the United States. But the president will not accept anything less than the complete, irreversible, and verifiable denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula in exchange. And he will present that to Kim in a way that is very appealing. Here's the Secretary of State. Listen here.
It is the case that we are prepared to make security assurances necessary for the North Koreans to engage in that denuclearization. That is, we're prepared to take actions that will provide them sufficient certainty that they can be comfortable that denuclearization isn't something that ends badly for them. Indeed, just the opposite, that it leads to a brighter, better future for the North Korean people.
Because that is one of the things that the North Koreans were worried about when John Bolton, the national security advisor, said, well, we'd like to employ the Libyan model. You saw some pictures of Kim Jong-un out and about walking around the Marina Bay Gardens earlier. He also paid a visit to the Marina Bay Sands Hotel. It's really an incredible piece of architecture. It has got a rooftop casino, pool, bar that is in the shape of a big cargo ship that spans across 3 high-rise towers. There you see a picture of it. He was up there at the top. It's interesting to point out, too, Dana, that the Marina Bay Sands is owned by Sheldon Adelson, who, of course, is a big supporter of the president. And as he took in the sights of the economic miracle of Singapore, perhaps Kim Jong-un kind of looking at this and saying, well, maybe that could lie in my future, too, if I'm willing to play ball with the president. Dana?
John Roberts, thank you. For more on this, let's bring in Bret Baier. He's Fox News chief political anchor and anchor of Special Report. Bret, you're the author of several books, and one of them, the most recent one, 3 Days in Moscow, talking about Reagan's summit during the Cold War. But also I thought about Eisenhower and the book you wrote about him. And one of his famous quotes was, "Plans are worthless, but planning is everything." And I was thinking about this. The administration has been working on this North Korea problem since the day the president won, because it was the first thing that President Obama told him. This will be your biggest problem. They've been planning for this, and yet the president has a lot of flexibility. How do you see things there on the ground?
Well, Dana, first of all, thanks for the mention there. You're right. Eisenhower was all about planning, and there has been a lot of planning before this actual sit down. You know, the first sit down will be with the president and Kim Jong-un and 2 translators in a room by themselves for at least 45 minutes, and then it'll open up to others. There has been a lot of planning and preparation to get to that point, and it has, according to Secretary Pompeo, sped along quickly. I do sense that this is closer to the early days of the Gorbachev-Reagan get-togethers and summits, and that maybe this is their Geneva, setting the table for other summits to come that lays out the structure of whatever comes out of these meetings. And Dana, just to point out, John's water bottle, I have one right here, and it is quite something to see these 2 leaders on you know, everything around here. There's water bottles and fans. And Kim Jong-un, for all the people who say he wanted to have that image, he's got lots of images all around Singapore.
It is pretty remarkable for somebody who leads a country that was part of the axis of evil, as defined by George W. Bush back in 2001 or 2002, whenever that State of the Union was, to now that he does have nuclear weapons. He now gets to have a seat at the table. And I'm curious, when the Secretary of State talks about security guarantees, what do you understand that those would be, and who would pay for those?
I think those are great questions, and we're going to learn more specifics as this goes on. Secretary Pompeo was very reluctant to go into any details, saying he wasn't negotiating with the press and he was going to let it happen at the table. I think that a lot of that has been ironed out, at least talked about before they sit down. You know, the Trump administration will tell you they've already got 3 hostages released, 4 if you said Otto Warmbier, but he's obviously died after the result of being held in North Korea. They had that nuclear facility that was destroyed. This is what the Trump administration would say, and they're sitting down at the table. Critics who are skeptical, or just skeptical people, would say, okay, you got the hostages, the facility was already collapsing, and by giving the sit down, you're giving Kim what he wants. I think we're going to see early what this is all looking like.
Well, and you know, I think that in some ways for Kim Jong-un, of course, we know that we're seeing all of this media. The people of North Korea will not see anything that Kim Jong-un doesn't want them to see. So he wants to be seen as getting all of this pomp and circumstance, that he is now an equal. But they also have nuclear weapons, and President Trump has this opening to try to stop that. One of the things that the United States has been saying for the past few weeks is that at this particular meeting, human rights will not come up. Take a listen, Brett, to a former North Korean prisoner, Kenneth Bae, on how he thinks about that.
I would love to see the President Trump to talk about the human rights issues and it's happening in North Korea as a part of the summit, because I was released and rescued by the American government here, but for the people living in North Korea, 25 million people living in North Korea, and their human rights is violated every day, especially with their religious freedom that they do not have right now.
Perhaps, Brett, it is not going to come up at this particular meeting between the president and Kim Jong-un, but presumably, and maybe you know, that State Department diplomats are preparing to deal with what could be the most horrific humanitarian catastrophe we've ever seen.
Yes, and Secretary Pompeo has spoken out publicly about that, specifically about North Korea, but whether it's going to actually be in these talks with Kim, we're hearing that it might not, but again, there's a lot of audibles that can be called at the table. One of the things that you mentioned was that the North Korean people won't know. They were just alerted, the people in North Korea, this morning, that Kim had left the country to come here. The word went out on statewide television, in part, perhaps, because he's worried about being out of the country and any plot to overthrow him.
So I'm going to show you just one thing. The other thing that they might not see, but maybe they will, is Dennis Rodman arriving. And as you saw, with the there's the souvenirs, there's this excitement. You know, in some ways, Dennis Rodman maybe really does deserve to be there. I mean, he was one of the first people that went over there. People sort of thought of it as a joke. I was sort of dismayed, thinking he's giving credence to somebody who has been a monster, if you just look at Otto Warmbier, but also all of the millions of people of North Korea who've been brainwashed and starved. And here you have this summit that's happened very quickly, and Dennis Rodman is there.
it's a little surreal. Let's just put it that way. I mean, you have impersonators of President Trump and Kim Jong-un walking around the streets here in Singapore. We took a tour. We're going to show you some of that on Special Report tonight. Then you have Dennis Rodman arriving. You have this president who is doing foreign policy different than you've seen before, shaking up the world kind of in a different kind of way. And you have Kim Jong-un, who arrives here with super security and brings his own toilet so that no one can examine his excrement. This is serious stuff here, and it's surreal. It's crazy.
Okay, I didn't know that about the toilet, but you know what? For those of you watching out there, now we know that that was an important thing. All right, Bret Baier, thank you. We'll catch up with you on the 5.
See you, Dana.
A warning for the president from a former UN ambassador about his meeting with Kim Jong-un and photo ops. I'll talk to Ian Bremmer about that and what else we can expect from this historic summit. We are a little less than 7 hours away from the meeting between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. I'm joined now by Ian Bremmer. He's president of the Eurasia Group and author of Us Versus Them. Tell me about... Well, let me actually, can I have you listen to Bill Richardson, former UN ambassador? He was talking earlier today about the dangers and the concerns about photo ops with Kim Jong-un. Watch.
I like the fact that they're going to meet together separately without advisors, sort of a get to know, let's trust each other. You know, I worry about those photo ops where they're hugging, because the North Koreans use that for their propaganda. And what Kim Jong-un has wanted to do is say, I'm on the same par with the President of the United States. And that makes him a world player on the stage.
Ian, if you look at the coverage even just so far, he already has a lot of the photo ops, right?
He does. I mean, he's had 2 summits now with the South Korean President Moon. He's had 2 summits with Xi Jinping, the Chinese president. The Russian foreign minister just visited him. This is a guy who, before Trump started with Fire and Fury, had never met with a single foreign leader, unless we include Dennis Rodman. Literally nobody, right? And now all of a sudden he's reaching out. That is, this is a big meeting. This is the most important. It's the most historic. And yet, by far, the most important country for North Korea, both politically, militarily, economically, is China.
And so what is China thinking today?
China feels like they have a more normalized relationship with the North Koreans. They were seeing them as more of a problem. That's why they were squeezing them so much economically. Now, they certainly don't want Trump to get ahead of the Chinese. They want to make sure that they're the ones cutting any deal. You'll note that when Kim Jong-un walked onto the tarmac in Singapore, landing there, it was an Air China plane that was taking him. There was a photo op from there, right, with a hammer and sickle. I mean, it's you know, not a surprise. Right?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. That's interesting. Let me, can I take you to another part of the world?
Sure.
Because this summit is happening just a couple of days after the president went to the G7. You wrote a book called Us Versus Them, and it almost feels like your book is playing out just as we watch on the world stage, as all these things change. Take a listen to Lindsey Graham, who was talking about tariffs in the United States.
I'm not so sure a majority of Americans believe that globalization and free trade is in our interest. I believe that. John McCain believes it. But the reason we're having these problems here at home, Brexit, Italy, there's a movement all over the world to look inward, not outward. And I think it's a mistake. But I'm not so sure most Americans agree with John McCain and Lindsey Graham.
Isn't that basically what you wrote in your book?
Couldn't agree more. I mean, I've certainly believe that globalization is a big win, not just for the middle classes of China and India, but also for the U.S. economy as a whole. But if the average American hasn't seen it, hasn't experienced it, if the United States sending troops all over the place on the back of enlisted men and women and their families, and they're not getting any benefits from that, then 40 years later, a lot of people are going to start just protesting, and that's why Trump won. They're very angry, and the fact that Trump, this was by far the worst G7 since the thing was created in 1975, since the first summit, by far the worst. But I think the average American isn't bothered by that. The average American's like, why are we supporting all these other countries when it hasn't helped me? So let's have a president who does America first. And I think that not only that as a slogan, but that as Trump acting out in Canada, as much as I think that's a problem for U.S. interests long term, the average American is really sick of being told everything's going to be fine and then not seeing the benefits.
Do you think that the G7 has outlived its purpose, and will it survive?
No, Trump thinks that. I don't think that. I think that the G7 is more important these days because the real threat to the United States isn't our allies. It's China. China's going to be the largest